Sister Marianne had lived most of her life inside the quiet walls of the old convent. At 82, she had grown used to mornings filled with soft footsteps, the smell of freshly baked bread, and the distant sound of church bells. She moved slowly now, but there was still a calm warmth in her eyes, the kind you see in people who have lived many years with purpose. Most of the younger people in the community knew her only as the gentle nun who watered the garden and hummed old hymns while trimming the roses. They did not know much about the life she had before joining the convent. They did not know she once filled crowded halls with her music, or that her fingers used to dance over piano keys as if they were telling a story no words could describe. That part of her life was long hidden, covered under years of service, prayer, and simple living. The convent was planning a small neighborhood event, nothing big, just a friendly gathering for families, volunteers, and anyone who wished to join. There would be food, small performances, and a few moments of shared gratitude. The sisters wanted a peaceful evening where people could feel the warmth of community, even if just for a few hours. One afternoon, while preparing the event, the sisters were discussing music for the program. An older sister mentioned, "Marianne used to play beautifully. Maybe she could play something simple for the gathering." A few of the younger volunteers had never heard this before. They turned to look at the elderly nun, surprised but polite. "Really? You play the piano?" One of them asked, trying to keep a respectful tone. Sister Marianne smiled gently, almost shyly. "I used to. It has been many years." Another volunteer spoke up kindly, but without much thought. "It might be too tiring for you, sister. The event is already going to be long. Maybe it's better if someone younger plays. We don't want you to strain yourself." The comment was not meant to hurt. In their minds, they were simply being thoughtful. But the words settled deeply inside her like a small weight pressing against an old memory. She tried to respond lightly. "I understand," she said with a nod. "It's all right." But as she walked back to her small room, she felt a quiet ache she had not felt in a long time. It wasn't anger. She did not have anger in her heart, but more a feeling of being gently pushed into the shadows, of being seen only as an old woman who needed protection from everything. She knew the volunteers meant well, yet she felt as if a door inside her had closed again. She did not blame them. Most people assumed older individuals needed rest, not challenges. They assumed age erased ability. Sister Marianne had heard similar comments before, always delivered gently, politely, almost like a kind warning. Over the years, she had learned to smile and nod, letting people think she was too fragile or too slow. It was easier that way. It kept her from hoping for anything more, but that afternoon, when she sat on her bed, she remembered something she had not thought about in years, the feel of piano keys beneath her fingertips, the soft echo of notes she once played, the sense of freedom that music used to give her. She used to sit at the piano for hours, lost in sound and emotion, forgetting time and worry. She had not touched the old chapel piano in months. Maybe even a year. The piano still sat in the chapel, covered with a cloth to protect it from dust. The sisters kept it more as a memory now than an instrument. Most of the younger volunteers didn't know how to play, and those who did felt shy performing in front of others. It remained mostly untouched that evening. After the other sisters had gone to rest and the halls were quiet, Sister Marianne walked slowly to the chapel. She pushed open the door gently, letting it close behind her with a soft thud. The room felt peaceful, lit only by the warm glow of a few candles. She walked toward the piano and paused in front of it. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the cloth. She didn't know if it was from age or from the memory she was about to wake. The piano was old but still beautiful. The wood had faded, but the keys looked the same as they did when she first arrived at the convent many years ago. She sat down slowly, taking a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment. She was afraid they would not move the way they used to. She told herself she would only play a few notes, nothing more. Just enough to feel a little of what she had forgotten. Her first touch on the keys was soft, almost hesitant, as if she feared breaking the silence. The note echoed gently through the chapel, then another and another. Soon, her hands began moving in a slow pattern. Finding old paths they thought she had long forgotten. The sound was not perfect, her hands shook a little. And a few notes were slightly off, but the feeling that rose inside her was something she had not felt in years. Her face softened, her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes closed. She played quietly, only for herself, letting each note carry pieces of memory she had kept hidden. After a few minutes, she stopped and opened her eyes. A tear had gathered at the corner, though she hadn't realized it. The music had woken something inside her, something warm and painful at the same time. She wiped the tear gently and placed the cloth back over the piano. She did not see anyone around. She thought she was alone, but she did not know that someone had been standing near the entrance of the chapel the whole time. Luca, a new volunteer. He had come to return some candles and heard the music drifting through the hallway. Curious and amazed, he stopped and quietly listened. He had never heard anything like it. It wasn't just music. It felt like emotion speaking without words. Even though the tune was simple and soft, he could feel a depth in it, something that made his chest tighten slightly. He didn't want to interrupt her, so he stayed hidden until she left the room. That night, Sister Marianne returned to her room with a mix of comfort and sadness. Comfort, because she remembered a part of herself she thought she had completely lost. Sadness, because she knew she would not be playing at the event. She believed no one expected that from her now. She believed her music belonged only to the past. She didn't know that her quiet moment had not gone unnoticed, and that it would begin a chain of events she could never have imagined. She didn't know that her simple tune, played only for herself, would soon ripple far beyond the walls of the chapel. For now, she simply lay in her bed, looking at the small cross on her wall, trying to sleep. She whispered a short prayer, something gentle and honest, and closed her eyes with a soft breath. The world outside remained unaware of the melody she had brought back to life. But her story was only beginning. The next morning began like any other at the convent. Soft bells rang, doors creaked open, and the sisters started their quiet routines. But something felt a little different for Sister Marianne. She carried a small secret in her heart, the memory of last night when she had played the piano again after so many years. The sound of each note still stayed with her like a warm echo. She didn't expect anything to come from it, but it gave her a tiny comfort. Like a flower blooming in a forgotten corner of her soul, she went about her day calmly, helping in the kitchen, watering the plants, and greeting visitors at the gate. No one mentioned music. No one asked if she had changed her mind about the event. Everything felt normal, and she told herself it was better this way. If no one asked her to play, she would not have to disappoint anyone. She was old now, and people assumed she could no longer do things the way she once did. She had accepted that, but someone was thinking about the sound he had heard in the chapel. Luca had hardly slept the previous night because the tune kept replaying in his mind. He had never heard anything like it. It wasn't just the music itself, it was something about the emotion behind it. It felt like listening to someone speak from their heart without saying a single word. He wanted to talk to Sister Marianne, but he didn't want to embarrass her. He had seen how quietly she slipped out of the chapel, as if her playing was something private and fragile. Still, he felt she deserved to know how beautiful her music was. All day, he looked for a moment to speak to her, but the convent was busy with preparations for the upcoming event. People walked in and out, carrying chairs, arranging decorations, checking sound equipment, and preparing food. Every time he saw her, she was surrounded by others or busy with chores. He didn't want to interrupt. Finally, in the late afternoon, he found her alone in the garden, trimming the edges of a small flower bed. She didn't see him at first. She was humming softly, lost in her own quiet thoughts. He approached gently, not wanting to startle her. "Sister Marianne," he said in a soft voice. She looked up and gave him the same warm smile she gave everyone. "Yes, dear? How can I help you?" He hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. "I wanted to ask you something, but I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all," she replied kindly. "Say what's on your mind." He took a breath. "Last night, I heard someone playing the piano in the chapel. And I think it was you?" Her hands paused over the flowers. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she lowered her gaze for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "You heard that?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. "Yes," he said softly. "And it was beautiful, truly." She looked away shyly, as though unsure what to do with the compliment. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear. I only played for a few minutes." "But those few minutes were enough," he said gently. "You have something special. Something I think people would love to hear." She shook her head lightly. "Oh no, I'm too old now. And my hands are not what they used to be. The younger volunteers were right. It's better if someone else plays." Luca felt a small frustration rise inside him, not at her, but at the way she had been discouraged. He wanted to tell her she was stronger than she believed, but he knew forcing her would not help. "You may be older," he said calmly, "but the emotion in your playing, it felt alive. It felt real." "You don't lose that with age?" She smiled sadly. "You are kind, but the world doesn't want music from someone like me. They want perfection. They want energy. They want youth?" He looked at her with honest eyes. "No, sometimes the world wants truth." "And you play with truth." She didn't answer. Instead, she continued trimming the flowers, moving slowly, as if thinking deeply about his words. He didn't press her further. He thanked her and stepped away, leaving her to her thoughts. Later that evening, Luca walked back to the chapel when no one was around. He felt drawn to the piano, the same way people feel drawn to things that remind them of something pure. He opened the cover of his phone and checked something he had done earlier, a very short video he had recorded the night before. He had not planned to record her playing. He wasn't even sure why he pressed the button. Maybe he wanted to keep the moment for himself. Maybe he wanted her to hear how lovely she sounded. The video was only 20 seconds long, but those 20 seconds held a rare kind of beauty. He watched it again. The dim light, the soft melody, the sight of her aged hands trembling slightly over the keys, it all felt emotional in ways he couldn't easily explain. He thought about sending it to her privately, but he didn't have her number, and he didn't feel comfortable showing her suddenly. So he kept it on his phone, thinking he would eventually find the right moment. But life has strange ways of changing direction while organizing photos and videos from the preparations. He accidentally clicked share instead of save. The video uploaded to a small community page followed mostly by local families and neighbors. He didn't realize this until hours later when he checked his phone again. The video had already been watched hundreds of times. Comments were flooding in. "Who is she? Her music is so full of feeling. This touched my heart. I want to hear the full song. So peaceful. This reminds me of my grandmother playing. Please share more." Luca's eyes widened. He hadn't meant for this to happen. He quickly deleted the post, hoping it hadn't spread too far. But people had already shared it. The video kept moving from one page to another, gathering more attention by the hour. Now he didn't know what to do. Should he tell her? Should he apologize? Should he pretend nothing happened? He couldn't hide it forever. He knew he owed her honesty. The next morning, he found her sitting in the courtyard, feeding small birds with leftover crumbs. She looked peaceful, unaware of the storm quietly growing online. He sat beside her carefully. "Sister Marianne, I need to tell you something." She glanced at him with gentle curiosity. "Of course. What is it?" He felt slightly nervous, but he couldn't lie. "Last night, the video of your playing, it was uploaded by accident." Her expression slowly changed, not angry, but confused. "Uploaded? What do you mean?" He swallowed. "It was posted online. Not on purpose." "I'm truly sorry. I meant to keep it private. But it was shared before I could delete it." She went quiet. Her hands rested still on her lap. For a long moment she didn't say a word. "I see," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry," he said again. "I should have been more careful. What are people saying?" She asked softly. He hesitated, but she deserved the truth. "They loved it. Many people. The video has reached thousands already." Her eyes widened slightly, as though the idea frightened her. "Thousands?" "Yes," he said gently. "And they weren't laughing. They weren't criticizing. They were touched. truly touched. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. She couldn't understand why strangers would care about her simple tune music she had played only for herself after years of silence. Why would they react like that? She murmured, "Because your music carries feeling," he told her quietly. "People can hear it. People feel it." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb everything. She had spent years believing her music belonged only to the past. And now, without her intention, without warning, the world was listening again. Luca spoke again, more softly this time. "They want to know more. People are asking who you are." She let out a small breath, somewhere between surprise and disbelief. "I am no one special." "You don't have to be special," he said gently. "You just have to be you. And that seems to be enough." She didn't answer, but her eyes grew wet with emotion she didn't try to hide. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something like rediscovered worth. For the first time in many years, Sister Marianne felt that maybe her music wasn't lost. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the world hadn't completely forgotten people her age. Maybe they still had something to offer that night. As she sat on her bed thinking about everything that had happened, she realized something important. Her story was no longer just her own. It had already begun to reach the hearts of people far beyond the quiet convent walls. And whether she liked it or not, the world had started listening. The days that followed were filled with unexpected twists. Sister Marianne couldn't escape the attention, no matter how hard she tried. The video Luca had accidentally uploaded had spread far beyond the small community page, reaching thousands, then tens of thousands of people. The music, simple yet profound, had touched something deep within the hearts of listeners. It wasn't the kind of music people expected to hear from an elderly nun, and that was part of its magic. It was raw, sincere, and unpolished, and somehow it spoke to people in ways they couldn't explain. Luca had tried to keep the situation under control. He'd even contacted a few people who had shared the video, asking them to take it down. But by then, the video had already been shared so many times that deleting it seemed almost impossible. Some of the comments were overwhelming, and they flooded in from all directions. "Her music makes me cry," one person wrote. "I haven't felt this moved in years," another commented. There were also messages from people asking for more, asking where they could hear the full song or whether Sister Marianne would ever perform again. Sister Marianne, meanwhile, had retreated into herself. She stayed in the garden, watering flowers or sitting by the window, gazing out at the trees. She had never intended for anyone to hear her play. She hadn't wanted the world to see her as a musician again. She had spent so many years distancing herself from that part of her life that the sudden attention felt almost like a violation of her own privacy. It wasn't just the attention she feared. It was the pressure. What if people expected too much? What if they were disappointed? One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned golden, Luca found her sitting by the chapel. She was looking down at her hands, resting in her lap, a quiet sadness in her eyes. He had tried to talk to her several times since the video went viral, but she had avoided him. She wasn't angry with him, at least not in any way he could. But there was a quiet sorrow in her that seemed to grow each day. He walked toward her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Sister Marianne," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the quiet of the evening. She looked up, her eyes soft and tired. "Luca," she said, almost in a whisper, "I suppose you're here to talk about the video again?" "I am," he admitted. "I know you're upset, and I understand why, but I think you need to see something." She tilted her head slightly, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. "I've been reading the comments," he continued. "The people who've watched the video. They don't see you as an old woman. They see you as someone who has something beautiful to offer." She didn't say anything, just looked down at her hands again. "They want to hear more," Luca went on. "They want to hear your music. And some of them even say it's changed them. One person said they hadn't cried in years until they heard you play. Others say they felt a deep peace they haven't felt in a long time." She sighed softly. "I never meant to cause all this. I was just playing, Luca. It was for me, not for anyone else. I know, he said gently. But you have a gift. And sometimes gifts are meant to be shared even when we're not ready. She remained, silent, staring at the ground as if she was thinking deeply about what he said. I don't want this attention, she said finally, her voice small. I'm not like those performers you see on television. I don't have the energy they have, or the stage presence. I don't have the strength to stand in front of a crowd. You don't need any of that, Luca responded softly. What you have is real, it's raw, and that's what people need to hear. It's not about energy or perfection, it's about honesty. You speak through your music. Sister Marianne shook her head slightly, a smile tugging at her lips, though it was laced with uncertainty. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. Luca sat down beside her, giving her space but staying close enough that she didn't feel alone. It's okay to be scared. But sometimes the things that scare us are the things that help others the most. Maybe it's not about you anymore. Maybe it's about them, the people who are listening. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the sound of distant birdsong drifting in the air, the soft rustle of leaves stirring as the wind picked up. Sister Marianne closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight. She had spent her entire life avoiding it, finding comfort in quiet, unnoticed service. But now it felt as though the world was pulling her in a direction she wasn't sure she was ready to go. I don't know if I can do this, she said softly. Luca nodded, understanding. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I think you should know that the people who've heard your music, they see something in you. Something beautiful. And they would love the chance to hear more, even if it's just once. Sister Marianne was quiet for a long time after that. She didn't respond right away. Her thoughts seemed distant, like they were floating in a place she couldn't quite reach. But deep inside, she felt something shift. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shift, but a quiet stirring, a small flicker of hope. The next day, a letter arrived at the convent. It was from a local community organizer who had heard about the video. The letter was polite and respectful, asking if Sister Marianne would consider performing at an upcoming charity event. It wasn't a big stage, not like those she had once performed on in her youth. It would be a small, intimate gathering of local families, just a handful of people who had been touched by the video. But it was an invitation. Sister Marianne held the letter in her hands for a long time, reading it over and over again, as if the words themselves could somehow provide an answer she didn't have. She knew this was the moment. She knew that somehow this letter was a sign. The following days were filled with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She practiced at the piano again, this time with more intention. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, but it was different now. She wasn't just playing for herself. She wasn't just playing to remember what it felt like to be young. She was playing for others, for people who had never met her, who might never know her name, but who had been touched by her music in a way that was hard to explain. The performance was set. It was small, as Luca had said, and there was no pressure. But for Sister Marianne, it felt like standing at the edge of a great unknown. She was nervous. She was afraid. But she couldn't ignore the small voice inside that told her to try. To give it a chance. The night of the event, the room was filled with quiet chatter. People greeted each other, laughed, and shared stories. Sister Marianne stood at the back of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of her shawl. She had been given a simple chair at the front, next to the piano, and the room was full of warm faces that greeted her with kindness and patience. When the time came for her to play, there was a hush. The audience didn't know what to expect. The piano was old, a bit out of tune, but Sister Marianne didn't mind. She sat down slowly, her fingers hovering over the keys. She took a deep breath. Then she played. It wasn't perfect. Not by the standards of concert halls, but it didn't need to be. The music was rich with emotion, raw and tender, like it was a conversation between her heart and theirs. And in that moment she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a deep connection to the people around her. It wasn't about applause. It wasn't about recognition. It was simply about sharing what she had to give. When she finished, the room was still. And then, slowly, the audience began to clap. Not loudly, but with a reverence that filled the room with warmth. Sister Marianne's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from a quiet, overwhelming gratitude. She had shared her music, not for the world, but for the people in front of her. And in return, they had given her something she had not expected: acceptance. And love. It wasn't the kind of love that came with big gestures. It wasn't the kind of love that demanded anything. It was the simple, gentle kind of love that said, "We hear you, we see you, and you matter." For the first time in a long time, Sister Marianne felt something inside her stir, something that was both new and old at the same time. A sense of peace, of belonging. It was enough. And just like that, her music had found its way back into the world. The days after the charity event passed in a blur, but something inside Sister Marianne had changed. She had not expected much when she first agreed to perform. It was a small, intimate gathering, not much more than a local community event, but the impact it had on her was immense. For the first time in years, she had shared her music with others, not for applause or recognition, but simply to offer a piece of herself. And it had been enough. The room had listened, not with judgment or expectations, but with openness and warmth. And in return, they had given her something more precious than she could have ever imagined: acceptance. The days following the event, Sister Marianne felt a quiet sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She found herself playing the piano more often, sometimes for hours at a time, not to prepare for any future performances, but simply because it felt right. The sound of the keys beneath her fingers was like a conversation between her heart and the world, a language that spoke without words. But even as she found comfort in her music again, the world outside the convent was changing around her. The video Luca had posted, the one she had never intended to share, was still circulating. More and more people were finding it, and the comments kept pouring in. Some were from strangers who had been moved by the music, others from people who had found a connection in her playing. They weren't just praising her talent, they were sharing stories of their own lives, their own struggles, and how the music had helped them in ways they couldn't fully explain. One afternoon, Luca found her sitting by the window in the chapel, her hands folded in her lap. She looked thoughtful, her eyes distant, as though she were lost in a memory. He approached her slowly, unsure of how to start the conversation. "Sister Marianne?" he asked softly. She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Luca," she said, her voice gentle, as always. "What brings you here today?" "I wanted to talk to you about the video," he said, sitting down beside her. "It's still getting attention. People are still talking about it." She sighed, glancing down at her hands. "I had hoped it would quiet down after the event." Luca hesitated, unsure of how to say what he needed to say. "It hasn't," he finally said. "In fact, it's only grown. I've been reading the comments. People are asking if you'll play again. Some are asking if they can hear more of your music." She shook her head as if trying to brush the thought away. "I never wanted any of this. I didn't mean for anyone to notice me." Luca watched her closely. "I know you didn't, but it's not about you being noticed, it's about the music. The way it touches people. People who need it. People who don't have a lot of hope right now. You're helping them in ways you don't even realize." Sister Marianne looked out the window, her eyes thoughtful. "I don't know, Luca. I'm not the person people think I am. I'm just a nun who happens to play the piano. I'm not someone who belongs on a stage." He could hear the uncertainty in her voice, the old fears she had carried with her for so long. He wanted to tell her it didn't matter. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't about a stage, about being perfect, or about the way people saw her. It was about the music. It was about the way her playing had made people feel. It was about how her gift could help heal others, even in small, quiet ways. But he knew she needed to come to that understanding on her own. "The people who have seen the video," he said slowly, "they're not asking for perfection. They're not asking for a show. They just want to hear what you have to offer." She looked at him, her brow furrowed in thought. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that they're not looking for someone to stand up on stage and perform like a professional. They just want you to share your music. It doesn't matter if it's messy or imperfect. It doesn't matter if it's just a few notes here and there. What matters is that it's real. It's honest. And that's what people are connecting to. Sister Marianne was silent for a long time. She could feel a flutter of doubt inside her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the music she played wasn't enough? She had spent so many years believing that her time had passed, that she was too old, too quiet, and too out of touch to offer anything of value. She had buried that part of herself for so long that it almost felt like she was unearthing something forbidden. I'm not sure I can do this. Luca, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure I can handle all of this attention. It's overwhelming. I'm not the person people think I am. Luca leaned in, his voice kind and understanding. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I think you should know that there are people out there who need your music. People who are struggling, who are lonely, who are going through things they can't talk about. Your music speaks to them. And I think if you give it a chance, you'll see how much it matters. Sister Marianne looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also something deeper, something that felt like the first stirring of hope. You really believe that? I do, Luca said without hesitation. I believe your music can help people, and I believe you have something that the world needs. Sister Marianne was quiet for a long time, lost in her own thoughts. She had never thought of herself as someone who could help others with her music. Music had always been something personal for her, something that had allowed her to connect with her own emotions, to find solace in the midst of her own struggles. But now, the idea that her music could help others, that it could reach out to people she would never meet, was both humbling and terrifying. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice filled with quiet resolve. But I can't promise anything. That's all I'm asking, Luca said with a smile. Just think about it. For the next few days, Sister Marianne spent a lot of time thinking. She returned to the piano more often, playing not for anyone else but for herself. As she played, she began to realize something. Her music wasn't just for her anymore. It had never truly been just for her. It had always been a gift, a way to express the things words couldn't reach. And now, it seemed, that gift was meant to be shared. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face a room full of people again. But for the first time in years, she felt something inside her stir, a quiet, unspoken understanding that maybe, just maybe, her time hadn't passed after all. Maybe the world still had a place for her music. And so, as the days went on, she played more and more, each note carrying with it a little more hope, a little more belief that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to share what she had with the world once again. The weeks after that conversation with Luca were filled with a quiet, unspoken change in Sister Marianne. She still spent most of her days in the convent, tending to the garden, helping with meals, and offering her wisdom to the younger sisters. But there was something different now, something that hadn't been there before. The music, the thing she had once hidden away and almost forgotten, had found its way back into her life. And this time, it didn't just live in her heart. It lived in her hands, in the soft notes she played when no one was around. When she needed to calm her thoughts or simply feel connected to something greater than herself, she had been playing more often. Not out of obligation, but out of a quiet joy she hadn't felt in years. The music had become her own personal prayer, a way of speaking to God and the world without using words. Some days she would play for hours, letting the melodies unfold naturally, without worrying about whether they were perfect. She had let go of the need to sound flawless. What mattered was the feeling, the emotion, and the peace it brought her. But then, one evening, as the sky faded to dark and the convent was quiet except for the rustle of trees outside, Luca came to visit her again. She had just finished playing when she saw him standing at the chapel door. His face filled with that same gentle determination he had shown before. "Sister Marianne," he began softly, "I've been thinking about something." She stopped playing and looked at him. "What is it, Luca?" "I know you've been thinking about the music," he said, taking a step closer. "I think it's time you share it with more people. Not for the sake of performance, but because it could help others. It could make a difference. She looked down at her hands, her fingers still resting lightly on the piano keys. I don't know, Luca. I'm still not sure I can do it. It feels too much, too overwhelming. Luca nodded, understanding the hesitation in her voice. I get it. It's a big step. But there's something about your music, something people need. I know it's not about being perfect or standing in front of a crowd, but just offering a part of yourself. That's what people are connecting to. Sister Marianne didn't answer right away. She had spent so many years keeping herself out of the spotlight, so many years believing that her age and her past were reasons to stay hidden. She had tried to convince herself that the world didn't need her music anymore. But deep down, she knew that the connection people felt to her music wasn't about age or perfection. It was about the raw emotion that flowed from her hands when she played, the unspoken comfort that her melodies seemed to bring. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said quietly. What if it's too much? What if people expect something from me that I can't give? Luca sat down beside her, his eyes kind and patient. You're not alone in this, sister. You have your music, and you have people who care. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be yourself. And that's enough. She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But what if they're disappointed? What if they don't like what I play? What if I can't do it the way they expect? They won't be disappointed, Luca said, his voice steady. They'll appreciate the honesty. They'll appreciate that you're sharing a part of yourself with them. That's what matters. People need realness. They need truth. For a long moment, Sister Marianne was silent, staring at the piano as if the answer was hidden somewhere in the keys. The idea of performing again, even in a small setting, still terrified her. She wasn't sure she could handle the attention, the expectations, or the fear of not being enough. But at the same time, she knew that her music was more than just a personal comfort now. It had touched people strangers she would never meet, and perhaps it could help even more. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I'll do it. I'll share my music again, but it has to be in my own way. No expectations. No pressure. Luca smiled, his eyes lighting up with gratitude. That's all I'm asking. Just share it the way you want to. People will understand. They'll be just as moved by your honesty as they were the first time. And so the plan was set. Sister Marianne agreed to play at another small event, this time a gathering of local families, some of whom had already heard her music through the video that had spread online. It wasn't a grand concert or a formal performance. It was simply a chance to share her music with people who had been touched by it, people who had asked for more. As the days passed, Sister Marianne practiced more regularly, each time finding more peace in the music. She still didn't know what to expect, but she was starting to feel that quiet excitement she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't about impressing anyone or living up to some standard of perfection. It was about being true to herself, sharing the part of herself that had always been there. Waiting to be heard again on the day of the event, Sister Marianne woke early, feeling a mixture of nerves and anticipation. She dressed in simple clothes, a long skirt and a blouse, nothing fancy, but enough to make her feel comfortable and at ease. When she walked into the hall, it was warm and filled with the soft murmur of voices. The families were gathered, some sitting at tables, others chatting in small groups. There were children running around, their laughter filling the room, but the atmosphere was calm, welcoming. Luca was there, of course, standing by the piano, ready to help with whatever she needed. He smiled at her when he saw her, his expression one of quiet encouragement. Are you ready? He asked gently. Sister Marianne nodded, though she could feel her heart beating faster in her chest. I think so. The room was quieting down as people began to settle in. Sister Marianne walked toward the piano, the sound of her footsteps echoing softly in the room. She sat down slowly, the familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingers feeling like a comforting embrace. For a moment, she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't need to impress anyone. She didn't need to be perfect. All she needed to do was play. She began with the same simple melody she had played before. the one that had touched so many hearts. Her fingers moved gently across the keys, the notes soft and flowing like a stream of water. The room was still, and for a brief moment it felt like time had slowed. She played with her heart, letting the music speak for itself. As the last note faded, there was silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something. Then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was heartfelt, warm, and filled with appreciation. Sister Marianne's eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of relief, of gratitude, and of something deeper, a quiet joy she hadn't felt in so long. She had shared her music, not for applause or recognition, but because it was what she needed to do. And in return, she had received more than she could have imagined. She stood up slowly, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them in her lap. Luca walked over to her, his smile wide and proud. "You did it," he said softly. Sister Marianne nodded, her heart full. "I did, didn't I?" And for the first time in many years, she realized something important. It wasn't the applause or the praise that mattered. It was the connection. The way music could bring people together. The way it could speak to hearts without ever needing to say a word. She had found her voice again, not just as a nun, but as a musician, as someone who had something to offer the world, no matter how small. And in that moment, Sister Marianne knew she had made the right choice. Her music was not just hers anymore. It belonged to the world now, shared in love, shared in peace, shared in truth, and that was more than enough.